So the next session is Dusty Floors in Nature. This will be taken by Professor Rama Govindarajan. She's from the International Center of Theoretical Sciences, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. Yeah. So Rama Govindarajan, she is a postdoctoral fellow from Caltech, California Institute of Technology. And she is currently professor at TIFR Hyderabad and also senior professor, dean academic at International Center of Theoretical Sciences. She's got a number of publications to her credit. I will not take much time and I'll invite her on stage. Please.
So we're going to talk about dusty floors in nature. Yeah, what are dusty floors? Let's first ask that question. So these are some examples of dusty floors. Can you see it at the back? Yeah, so there's volcanic ash, snow avalanches, river sediments, things like that, dust storms. Who's seen a dust storm? How many of you have experienced a dust storm? Okay, lots. So then there's infection, which we've been talking about a lot, about COVID and all. And although my title is Dusty Floors in Nature, I wanted to put one thing here which is industrial, because there are dusty floors in industry everywhere, like in the food industry when you make milk powder for babies, in the fertilizer industry when you create fertilizers, all of those need to understand dusty floors in order to solve these problems. Here is a picture of a tsunami, like you see this ball of water coming in. Probably there are people in this room who were not born during the famous Indian Ocean tsunami, but it was really, really bad. And so you can have big rocks and big things being brought onto the land. And in fact, after that tsunami, we had gone to a little village near the town of Tirukadayur. And this village had been completely, covered by the tsunami. And the villagers had actually fled to the mountain tops. And we were not good at this work, but we at least gave courage for the villagers to come down. And so we started digging. There was lots of mountains and mountains of sand, rocks, all kinds of things. We found a temple. We started digging everything from the temple because we thought clearing the temple is a good thing to do before you, clean other places. So after digging like this amount of stuff, we could see that the temple had actually nice mosaic floors and beautiful flooring over there. So this is the kind of debris that's brought by the tsunami. So this also is a dusty floor. So there is, and you can't see too clearly at the back, maybe with good reason. What city is this? Delhi, right? Yeah, this is Delhi. So we need to study dusty floors. That's the basic moral. And ISRO actually has brought a new product. Can you see this red thing? So this is how much of aerosol is covering India. So it's not a problem unique to Delhi. It's a problem for a lot of North India and parts of South India. This is not something we can ignore. So that's dusty floors. What is this? GPGP? Any guesses? Even a vague guess is okay, just try. No. See that photo. Okay, it's the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. There is one big garbage patch here, one big garbage patch there. And okay, like, it looks like this, people. And this is actually garbage in the Pacific Ocean, which extends to 300 miles. Like, I mean, look at this and look at this, and we'll decide humans are bad, like we're really bad guys. So we really need to do something to improve ourselves. So that's basically the moral. In this talk, I'm going to use some equations, but you don't have to worry if you won't get those equations. I'll tell you what I'm going to say. There is this quantity called the Reynolds number. How many of you have heard about it? How many of you have not heard about it? A few people, don't worry. The Reynolds number is going to be important in the kind of thing that we talk about, which is, and it's a measure of how inertial or how energetic the flow is compared to how viscous it is. So this ratio is the Reynolds number. What you need to remember for this talk is, when you have a large object whose length scale is big, or it's a very fast object whose velocity scale is big, then the Reynolds is big, or if the viscosity is small. Whereas if it is slow and small and the viscosity is big, then the Reynolds number is very low. So here, if you have a large object, like those rocks being brought by the tsunami and thrown on the ground, those have very, very high Reynolds number. Okay, and in air. So this is in air or water. Those have very, very high Reynolds number. In contrast, if you have honey, it's anything you put in honey is going to have very small Reynolds number. So like if I drop a little object in honey, it's going to go down very slowly. And that is like the tiniest dust particle. For the tiny dust particles, and what is this? Biologists? Huh? It's a virus? Is that what somebody said? Yeah, it's a coronavirus or some virus. So this virus, it's floating through air and it thinks air is an icky goo, because it's so very tiny that its Reynolds is so very small that it doesn't need honey. Even for it like to swim through air, it's like it's swimming through honey. For it, it thinks air is an icky goo. So that's the way to think of Reynolds number. So in large Reynolds number, so here I have put one ball in large Reynolds number and a ball in very small Reynolds number. Now in large Reynolds number, just keep a ball or even move a ball, you're going to have this kind of flow behind it. This is the beauty of fluid mechanics. You're doing nothing, you're just taking a ball and moving it like that. Cricket ball samajh lo. You're going to get enormous vortex shedding behind it. And so like there are these, circulatory patterns of air behind this. In contrast, do that in honey, you're going to see nothing. The honey is going to move like this gently, then go around it and then come like this. Nothing interesting. But we are going to counter that now. So this is the basic thing about Reynolds number. And we are going to now talk in this slide about Reynolds number going towards 0. So very, very slow flows and very, very viscous, like think about honey or think about a virus. So the first thing is a sphere, like just a little ball, like moving in very, very slow speed. So you would think, oh, this is such an easy problem and everything must be known about it. No, that's what we are going to come to. And now imagine, like if I'm talking about a dust storm, how many of these little sand particles are there in that big dust storm? There's quadzillion of them. So that number, if you want to understand and solve, like no computer can solve it, so we need to have some basic understanding. So like it could be a perfect sphere, but most of the time things are not perfect spheres, right? Like these are little ice particles forming in the cloud and falling from there. And these are of all shapes. You can see that nothing is very spherical. So you could also have objects like this kaju which are falling, and you could have funny shaped rocks and things. So even at low Reynolds number, if things are not spherical, your equations become immediately more complicated. So we already said for a sphere we don't understand everything, and then like you have much more complicated equations, and this is all for one kaju or one little sphere. Now they talk to each other through the flow. So if there's two spheres falling in honey, then they'll fall faster than each of them alone, because they'll drag each other. Moreover, like I'm just dropping a sphere in gravity, right? It should fall vertically down, right? There's no force acting in this direction. Whereas if I keep two like this, it will start moving like this. Just in honey. You can try this at home. Just put two little objects in honey, some edible objects. So then, yeah, like then you'll see that they start moving sideways. So lots of interesting things happen there itself. Okay, so now we said even at low Reynolds we don't understand anything. We don't understand it fully, let me put it that way. And this is an equation, it's called the Gatignol-Maxey-Riley equation. It is basically derived from Navier-Stokes equation for fluid mech. and this is for the acceleration of one particle. How the one particle accelerates, one little spherical, little dust particle. Do you see this part, the magenta part of the equation? You don't have to be well versed in equations, but you can see that here is an integral from 0 to t of something something divided by t minus s ds. So this makes it enormously complicated. So if I want to understand about one dust particle, I have to know about its entire history through all time. I have to store its acceleration through all time, and at every time, in order to jump one time step, I have to compute everything in its history again. So this is what makes this thing very, very complicated, very, very computationally intensive. It's very difficult to solve because it's not a dynamical system. Like, it's not something which, you know, I know the velocity now, so I can find out where it will be in the next instant. I need the entire history. So all of this, and my colleague Vishal Vasan, he came up with excellent mathematical techniques to solve this accurately. So Saumav and Divya especially has been working entirely on this equation. This is called the Bassett-Boussinesq history. So then, like, how to solve for one sphere, that's the story. One little particle which is obligingly spherical, which is going at 0 Reynolds number, no vortex shedding, nothing, just boring thing around it. And then why is it so hard to solve? Because it's accelerating. It accelerates in a slow way. So, and Saumav is another student working on this. Now, so this theory was, like this theory was liked by many people, the way we solved this thing. And so we decided to do an experimental project, and this is a collaboration with the McKeown group in Stanford, where Tomek is doing all the experiments and Divya is doing all the theory. So like we just have nothing except a little falling ball. Take a ball, put it in a viscous fluid and let it fall. That's about the experiment. We need like to get good streamlines and things which Tomek has got. Already you see that, you know, that boring streamline you saw in honey is not true. We're seeing something interesting, we're seeing something time varying. So yeah, there's lots to be understood in low Reynolds number in a sphere. We'll come to the non-spherical part a little later. So now we'll go to the other extreme just for a few minutes. Okay, we'll just go to the other extreme. There's very high Reynolds number. We saw this vortex shedding behind the ball. And now they can be like, you know, whenever there's force, you have to imagine that the body and the fluid are talking to each other. So the fluid is pushing the body and the body is doing something else in response to the fluid. And so this kind of interesting thing can happen. And these are actually, I got it today from a, Karnataka travel site, and there are 3 beautiful seeds which do things. And even rocks brought in by tsunami are high Reynolds number. Now Punyakoti, she was a short-term student in my group some years ago. Punyakoti brought this seed to my attention. And she said this seed is doing something very strange, and we were trying to work on it. It's a very hard problem. We are still working on it. I need these fans to be shut out. I need these fans off. So these are like now very many years old. I hope the seed works. So these things, okay, they are exactly that seed, right? Because like if I throw it, then you'll think it's cheating because of the fans. I'll do it here. But it won't fall far. I need it to fall far. Huh? So now like the air is still because the fans are going to go off, okay? So this thing should just go up and down under gravity, right? But we'll see what it does. And this actually is a very, very clever tree. It's evolved like enormously well. It's evolution that's made it do this. So the point is that if you have a tall tree like and this is in the Mangalore, the Western Ghats, which is already full of tree cover, right? So now you have lots and lots of trees there all under tree cover. If the seed is going to fall under its own mother tree, then it doesn't have much chance of getting light and it cannot grow very well. So its only hope in life is to go very, very, very far away from the mother tree and fall somewhere like very far. So it needs to keep itself aloft, and there are winds in the, winds coming from the Arabian Sea there. So like if they aloft, then they'll travel far. The only thing is they shouldn't fall very quickly to the ground under gravity. So it's evolved itself these 5 nice petals, and it's doing this. Now let's try it. You see it? See it? Yeah, that's what it does. So like different shapes of dust particles do different things. That's basically what I wanted to show. Yeah, you can have the fans on now. Okay, so we also said particles can affect each other, and this can have a big effect on generating large scale flows, very big scale flows, erosion from the hills, different things, landslides, blah, blah, blah. So this morning my friend Jim McElwain sent me this movie when I asked him for it yesterday. So this is a movie I'm going to play, and you can tell me what you see. This is actually a helicopter, it's difficult to see. You saw that? Can you put volume on my this thing? Do you see this? There's too much light in the room, but do you see it? It's a snow avalanche, right? So this is a dusty flow. In order to study the snow avalanche, now you can see it coming down here. Sorry for the poor light, but I'll show it on my laptop to whoever wants to see it again. So this is like the helicopter. Helicopter is coming there to a very lonely place in Switzerland, and it's dropping some TNT, some explosive. And that explosive is setting a little explosion, and that little explosion with a little bit of snow moving is collecting snow as it goes down, because potential energy is getting converted to kinetic energy. So you have more and more and more snow joining, and all of them getting eroded and falling down. This is what particle interaction can do. Okay, so we started looking at particle interaction in a theoretical and more simple way. So here is Rahul Chajwa. He finished his PhD a couple of years ago, and he's now a postdoc in Stanford. So he did this experiment where we just put a row of discs in a very viscous oil. And do you see it falling? Do you see a nice pattern emerging? That's a nice instability. We can actually do a theoretical calculation. So it's actually a nice wave pattern which is emerging out of nowhere. This is an experiment, no cheating. Just like things falling. And we can actually do the theory for it, and we can show that something very interesting is happening. It's not a standard linear instability, it's something more interesting, which is what I'll tell for now. And then here is Harshit, who's a present student, and he tried to look at Rahul's experiments in the non-linear regime, like after the pattern goes haywire and there's clumping. So these particles are coming together and clumping in certain regions, and that's going to be very, very important for us. And Harshit did the theory, and here is the movie of the experiment. And it's going to go to long time, so you'll see them all falling, like clumping and falling fast. The guys who clump fall fast. And this is the theory. You see the similarity? So you can actually take a simple problem like this and solve it from first principles and actually understand what's seen in the experiment and show what's happening. But even here we are making enormous assumptions. Okay, why do we need clustering? I'm talking about all these particles coming together and clustering. So why do we really need clustering? Here are some examples. So in the previous talk you saw all about galaxies and all about those things. How did they even form? Like how did planets form? In particular, somebody asked about an exoplanet. So how did any planets form? So here you have a central star, and this is a protoplanetary disk. And things are happening in this disk. There's dust particles in this disk which are collecting into little pebbles, and those pebbles are collecting further into planetesimals, and things like that. So you need all these particles to come together and cluster. So each of them, if they're going in a straight line without interacting with the other guy, they will never clump. It's this clumping instability that's very important for planet formation, and by clumping I just mean that they're all coming into one little place. And so for raindrop formation, if tiny raindrops in the cloud never came together to collide and coalesce, you will never get rain. So you need clumping there. We don't understand how clumping happens. Like even in this planet formation, it's an open question. In rain formation, it's an open question. And this thing I'll come to like in some detail, which is marine snow, which is important for carbon sequestration. We will come back to this. And also like if there are microorganisms which reproduce sexually, then they need to come in contact with each other. And most of the time, these guys are too dumb to make actual decisions. Only the flow brings them together, or only mechanics brings them together. So this is important. And here is the biological pump. How many of you seen the biological pump before? Okay, I'll explain it in some detail. So there is carbon dioxide. So like I was saying that humans are putting a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, right? So we are doing this and we are actually heating up the world. But who's helping us is these phytoplanktons. They're actually helping us to mitigate this problem that we are putting in. And so what they do is they suck up the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and in the ocean like a big fraction of the carbon dioxide we put in is being drunk by these little creatures, the phytoplankton. And then there is a whole biological pump. So there's phytoplankton who are eaten by zooplankton, and then zooplankton can migrate, or these things can die and their dead bodies and their fecal matter can fall down, and they form these sinking big structures which then go deep down, and they can get, the carbon can get sequestered deep into the ocean. And some millions and millions of years later, it might come back to the surface, but right now we're not worried about it. So we want carbon sequestration to occur. In fact, one of the big plans in geoengineering, or one of the big things that a lot of people are talking about. So we're talking about how to do engineering things to mitigate climate change, right? So that is geoengineering. And one of the big plans is how can we make many phytoplankton. Like can we make farms of phytoplankton? Like can we create these big continents of phytoplankton which will then suck carbon dioxide and take it deep into the ocean. This is one of the things being very, very seriously studied. So the phytoplankton and zooplankton, they are very important because we all know they're very important because they are primary food for bigger fish and other things, right? So other things have to feed on these. Like there are whales who eat only plankton. What's that whale called? Baleen whale? I think one of them can only eat phytoplankton. So big animals need to eat them, so they are food, but more than that they are sequestering carbon. So I want to quote one of my colleagues who said the following. So this is a phytoplankton, this is a zooplankton, it's a zooplankton which is very, very small. Like if I have it in a bottle, I'll need a magnifying glass to see it. It's that small. So I've drawn its shoulders, can you see? I've written shoulders here, can you see it at the back? Yeah, basically this is because my colleague made this very interesting observation that, these critters, on their tiny shoulders lies a huge responsibility of saving the planet. So that is this thing. So I like this very much. So remember that we need to understand sinking phytoplankton. We need to understand sedimentation in many different contexts. Okay, so this is Melissa, my friend and my collaborator. She's an amazing person who goes out into the sea and she puts these very long ropes effectively into the ocean. And so suppose the ocean is many kilometers deep, they'll have traps at different levels. And they will trap the falling carbonaceous material. And after some days, they'll collect these traps and then they'll study what is in that trap and how far things are falling, how fast they're falling. And like I said, this agglomeration or this clustering is extremely important. So she sent me this movie like just in the, yeah, so this is, she's done this in the lab, but with real phytoplankton she's collected in the ocean. And then she's kept salt water here and plain water there. So they're all going and settling there. They're not falling as fast because there's salt water. So they are now not buoyant anymore. They're not heavy anymore, right? So something will fall if it's heavier than the fluid outside, right? So when you have salt water is heavier than plain water. So they go to some height and settle there. So like there are many calculations which can go wrong if you neglect like the entire system as a whole, and you may completely get the carbon sequestration wrong. Any questions so far? The problem is plastic is not easily biodegradable, right? No, there are people working on simpler kinds of plastics which are biodegradable at a shorter time scale. But now that we put this garbage patch, yeah, like, I mean, no living thing can eat plastic right now and get converted into carbonaceous matter. So unless you can make plastic which these can eat. Huh. Possibly. Possibly there are ways to biodegrade these plastics in a better way, but yeah. So we said that, you know, like all this stuff we talked about was, you know, initially we talked about these particles which are all spherical, right? We talked about this spherical particle and we said when it's accelerating we don't understand what's going on. We have to, and I mean it can mix the flow in such a big way and somebody else there can get disturbed by what this one is doing. All sorts of interesting things can happen with spherical particles. And we talked about these instabilities which were from non-spherical particles, and we then asked this other question about non-spherical particles. So we said if they interact, they form these waves and they cluster, they form these beautiful waves which can be theoretically explained, everything. So what if it is not a sphere? Already the equations become very complicated. So I told you already that, you know, this seed that we dropped, it was doing all this fun stuff, and we said none of this is going to happen in honey because it will just go straight in gravity because the streamlines are all uniform and it's just going to fall. It's going to be very, very boring. So we took up an object, we invented an object actually which looks like this. Actually the true statement is that Harshit invented this object. So like we had to go through, like, you know, we had to make many discussions about convexity and concavity, and we wanted a simple object. We didn't want some random object. If a random shaped object does random things, you will not be surprised. But if a beautifully symmetrical object which has two planes of symmetry, it does random things, you will be surprised. So what we did, so it's effectively take a spheroid like an ellipsoid, then like bend it like this, make a kaju. So you got the kaju, the cashew nut, and then you make it concave on one side. Like you push it down on one side, and that's basically this body. So you get this body, we have to solve the equations in, you know, the body fixed frame and then understand what gravity does. It's like these equations themselves are written down and those coefficients are written down for this body specifically. Like Harshit is the first one who calculated all these quantities for this body. It's not very easy to calculate. It's a very big simulation which takes many, many hours. Now we come back to the Reynolds number question. All of us have seen leaves falling, right? And they do interesting things. They already do interesting things when the Reynolds number is high. As we said, this is at 0 Reynolds number. No unsteadiness, nothing, 0 Reynolds number. And it's like I'm dropping this leaf in honey, I expect it to just fall. But what happens? This is what it's doing. And this is the thing that, you know, if you look from above, what it's doing on the ground. So here it's in the body fixed frame, so it's not moving, but here is how it's moving on the ground. And it makes like beautiful patterns, and this is a quasi-periodic system. So lot of mixing is going on in this thing. Okay, so here is my summary. I've basically done with my talk early so that we can have some time for questions, and also I'm conscious that lunch is there awaiting us. So yeah, so this is Rahul's, one of his experiments. I've forgotten that thing that he used, but it's something which comes in makeup, some nail polish, nail shiny things or something like that. So those are these objects. You know, to shine nails, you have those little things. Mica things, yeah. So those are these. This is actually a small scale experiment. And you just put them and see how they don't fall like just under gravity. They all collect into a tube and fall in a tube. So why do these things happen? So like, I'd like to end by saying that dusty flows are terribly, terribly hard to solve. But they're very important in a variety of contexts, whether it's pollutant dispersal or, you know, sediment going into the ocean, or tsunami coming in, or, you know, just to understand avalanches. You know, whole villages are covered by avalanches, and we have like problems every year in this. So there's a whole range of situations where we need to get the right answers, and to get the right answers, we need better understanding. So like, and also they're very interesting, like lot of new maths has come out of this, because mathematically these are hard problems. Lots of new techniques like singular perturbation theory. I can talk over lunch to somebody who's interested. And then this concept of algebraic growth as opposed to exponential growth of perturbations, and a variety of such things like boundary integral methods. A variety of such things are either employed or emerge out of these systems. So mathematically, that's what attracts us, because we're kind of applied mathematicians. So that is very entertaining for us. And here is my group, apart from Divya and Sauma and others whose photo I already showed you in the talk, this is the rest of my present group. And they're all PhD students, except this one is a master's student, and this one is a long-term, like a 2-year student, and some of them are shared with other faculty. And I've written one unhappy face here and said the ratio is epsilon. Like, what am I referring to here? Women. Yeah, it's very sad, like except for Divya, there's nobody in my group today. So this ratio is epsilon, and we need epsilon tending to 1. So the unhappy face is not about these people, they're all excellent people and like very good budding scientists. Thank you.
Ma'am, this is regarding the particle movement in astrophysics, like they move and make a bigger particle and they become a planets. But there is no air, there is no Reynolds number, so how it is all going to happen?
Excellent question. So in the protoplanetary disk, there is some gaseous material. It's not, you know, as much as on the ground, like each molecule is very far apart from each other, and the mean free paths are very, very big. But still there is dust particles in a medium, and very often it's treated as a continuous medium.
But what is the
drive? So if you go large enough in scale, so like even in fluid mech, right, actually we have, like suppose I take water, I've got H2O molecules sitting there, right, and then I've got this ball which could be a lot bigger than the H2O molecules. But then like as I go down in scale to the dust particles, which are very, very small, they actually don't see this fluid as a continuum. They actually see individual water molecules. So they execute Brownian motion and they do things like that. So similar things happen when you gone away in scale and zoomed out, but because all the parts are big, you need to go to bigger scale to treat it as a continuum.
Thank you, ma'am.
And these particles are centimeter size, whereas these are micron size. Did I get that right? No, did I get the general concept right? Yeah.
So ma'am, in the first slide you showed about the dust storm. Is it affecting farming in any way?
So dust storm, I don't know, but I don't know about the economical consequences of dust storms, but they are pretty bad. Like at least in Delhi, I've experienced them, and they can cover lots of things. And I can imagine that if you have like little plants and they're covered by dust, unless you have rain again, then photosynthesis and everything becomes hard for these plants which are weighed down by dust. Tiny plants can even be killed by big amounts of sand landing on them.
Any more questions?
Rama, this work seems to also have some bearing on the active matter
Yes.
work. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So like we, in fact, hopefully today we'll be submitting a paper on active matter. It's almost ready. So the point is that what's the difference between a regular dust particle and like an active particle? Maybe in a virus there's very little difference because a virus doesn't have any, abilities of its own. Whereas bacteria and some slightly higher animals do have abilities of their own. And so we have written a paper where, these bacteria, so there are bacteria which are not actually using their brain, but they have propulsion. And because they have propulsion, they can inject energy into the fluid. So normally the fluid, these particles cannot inject energy. Unless, gravity is pulling them down, so they inject energy. Without an external force, they cannot do that. But animals can do that. They can inject energy. The net momentum will be constant. The net momentum will be zero, but they can do this. They can push the fluid around. And now what these bacteria do is, many of them, they follow their nose. And so their nose could be like, phototactic, geotactic. There are various things they like some of them in the ocean, they see that there's light above, they go above. And so they do these extra motions which are not from external forces. And how the fact that these internally generated forces change the answer. So that is a very good way, and their interactions also change, everything changes when they're not using any decision making. So the higher animals can actually see the other animal, like birds, they do decision making and they see the other bird and they fly in V formation and all. These guys are not doing all that, but just because they follow their nose and they follow certain things, they do interesting things.
Hello, yeah. It was a very interesting presentation, yeah. So you showed that Pacific garbage. So the outcome of your work, will it be able to clean up the ocean? For example, all these things can come together and maybe several ships can go and clean up that. So the study will throw light so that you can ensure that all the things cluster together and then it can be evacuated.
So that's a very good question, and it's also a more broad question that we need to address. So I'm happy that you brought this up. So we are at the very, very theoretical end of it. We are applied mathematicians who will, we'll freeze when we see quadrillion particles. We don't have that compute power. We can do simple computations with few lakhs of particles, and we can do theory with 1 or 2 particles. So we are at that end where we try to understand the very basic thing. But then you need to gross it out and go to the next length scale and say that, okay, on an average, these are the things happening. So for example, ML can be used for that. And say, oh, on an average, these things are happening. So we will take it to the next size level. And there in that size level, we will see how we can, solve the things, knowing the things that happen at small scale and so on. So we could go all the way to a very big planetary scale and see how these dust particles joining together can actually come together on a very big scale and so on. So we give small mechanisms for clumping, but we need this to be taken to a bigger level, for which we need ML experts, we need people who do very big scale, earth scale simulations, we need very, very powerful computers, and so we need to work in connection with other people. So we are trying this in a small way. For example, we talk to people in ISRO and we try to take some satellite data and try to do simulations which connect to that, but this cannot be done by one group alone. It has to be, we need a more concerted activity in India, and NASI is probably a good forum to bring that up. Yes. No, CFD packages don't do well in all these things. See, they can do, so for example, a very, very powerful CFD package can take one cashew nut and resolve it in the flow. There is no CFD package which can do hundreds and hundreds of cashew nuts, for example, in turbulence. So You cannot, like that's the thing, because they're interacting at far distances, no? This is the thing. So like CFD in these matters is in its infancy. That's a good summary of that. It can do some things very well. So I'm not saying CFD is bad. CFD is great. I am a computational fluid dynamicist. So that's not what I'm trying to convey. But if you want to do particulate flows, you need to go a lot more.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Rama, for the wonderful talk and sort of opening our eyes to the complexity of dust flows. So this brings us to the end of the first half of the session. Now I request Professor Ashok Mishra to come on stage, and we would like to honor the speakers in the morning. Professor Kaur to come on stage, Pradeep Kaur. Dr. Sai Geeta. Professor Annapurni Subramaniam. And Professor Rama Govindarajan. May I request all the speakers of the morning to please assemble on stage for a group photograph. Sushila and Sridhar.
I forgot to mention, it's all been engineered by Surya Sati Bose and Sushila, who are both here.
Okay, we may assemble for lunch. Lunch is served, and we will restart the session at 1:45 with the panel discussion.